Welcome back, everyone, for this week's FastTrack live workshop. Tremendously honored to have a personal friend and mentor who I've benefited tremendously from throughout the years. Everybody needs somebody like this in their corner. Professor Martin McKee, delighted to have you join us today. Martin, what do you really enjoy about this session that we're doing today?
Well, obviously, one of the main goals of academics, of researchers, as they progress along their career is to get their papers published. I think there's also actually an ethical duty to get your work published because often the work is being done with public funding, and therefore you don't want to hide it from the world. You don't want it not to be used. So I think that there's an importance for both the importance of the work that you have done and the people who have contributed to it as subjects, as patients, whatever. But it's also important for your career too. And a lot of the work that David and I have done over the years has been supporting our early career researchers, our junior colleagues, to get publications. And, this is a way in which we can maybe help them to have a higher hit rate when they do submit to journals.
Martin, I've benefited a lot from your publishing tips over the year. I'm going to flash you for a quick tip here in a second. But what we're going to cover are our top 5 reasons your paper got rejected. And you're going to tap not just mine, but also Martin's best tips over the years of how to preempt these. Because getting rejected is just one of the most frustrating things I've seen anybody go through as an academic. Over time, you get thick skin. But at the beginning, it can feel like you just got
Well, David, you've just frozen, but one of the tips that I would have is that,
stabbed in the heart. And
sorry,
I've seen
David,
some
I
students
think
get
one
a
of the tips that I would have is that if your paper is rejected, then that is not the time to go into a deep depression. Turn it around quickly. I mean, providing that it's not, there's the editor hasn't pointed out some fatal flaw with it. But there are many reasons why you get rejected. Now, I've published, I think, over 1,500 publications in my life. That's largely because I've been publishing for a very long time. But I still get rejections. And of course, when you do get rejections, sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it's the fault that the paper isn't very good. We'll come on to all the reasons in a minute. But sometimes it's because the editors get it wrong. Sometimes it's because the reviewers get it wrong. Now, editors are not infallible. I've been an editor. I was editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Public Health for 6 years, and I was an editor within the editorial team for much longer. I'm on lots of editorial boards. So, I see that this happens. The other thing is that reviewers get it wrong, and reviewers can get things wrong for a whole series of reasons, some of which, to be perfectly honest, are that they've got their own motivations. They may see your paper as competition to them. They may just not be very nice people. When I'm asked to review a paper, I really try to be positive and constructive, providing it's not one with fatal flaws. But if there's some hope in it, I would like to try to be positive. Not everybody does that, and they're just really disparaging. So just because your paper is rejected doesn't mean it's the end of you and your academic career. The biggest reason for people not getting papers published, certainly I used to say this in the old days before electronic submissions, was the inability to put manuscripts into envelopes and post them. Your paper gets rejected, turn it around, put it in an envelope and post it today. Go online and resubmit it. Most papers will have a home somewhere. Not all, but many will have. So it may not be your fault that it's being rejected. That's my main tip, I guess.
Super important, Martin, to keep things moving. Stay tuned. We're going to come to these tips. We've got 2 video submissions we're going to cover, and then you can see Martin's got a wealth of information. I'm so excited. Thank you again for joining us, Martin. Saying hi to some people here. Hey, Katija, good to have you join us today. So, Martin, before we dive in, wealth of tips. Give us your first quick general tip for research you've got this week.
Well, there's a whole series of practical things. Just get your referencing right. There is now no excuse for not using referencing software. You might use Zotero. I happen to use EndNote. Make sure you're using the same software as your collaborators, I should say. So it's much easier whenever you're working collaboratively to do that. But, there are so many times that you see people get referencing wrong. And it's just irritating for the editors, irritating for the reviewers. And it also adds to your work. The number of times I've seen junior researchers who put all the references in manually, you resubmit it to a new journal, and then they redo them all manually. Whereas if it's an EndNote or something like that, you just click a switch and that's it.
Yeah. So, massive time savings. If you're not using Reference Manager, start today and you'll wonder what you've been doing the past 500 years wasting your life. Okay, listen, let's jump over, Martin. I've got a really exciting submission here from Divraj. I want to pull Divraj on.
So,
Hey, Divraj, whoa, hang on a second. Let me adjust the format and kind of promote Divraj to the spotlight. So, yeah, Divraj has a systematic review. Let's hear what Divraj has to say, Martin, and keen to get your thoughts on this too.
my question to you is, how can I narrow down my results?
Whoa, hang on. We got to start it from the beginning. Whoops. Technological glitches here. You can see I'm actually at my family house where I grew up, streaming from Texas at the moment. Anybody in Texas? Hello? Okay, here we go.
Hello, Professor Stuckler. My name is Divraj, and here is my submission for the live session. I'm currently working on a systematic review concerning the impact of artificial intelligence on the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and neonatal seizures compared to experts. So for this systematic review, when I've run my search string through Scopus, Web of Science, and PubMed, in total I've received 26,723 papers results. And it's a very big amount for me to work with because I only have 1 month to finish this systematic review. And after running these records through a screening, I found that there was 10,845 duplicates. So at the end, I was left with 15,878 records to go through. And after that, I screened through these records for those articles not in English, those who were review papers, and those that were not journal articles, and which resulted around which left me with around 10,000 articles to work with.
Okay. Divraj continues here. Divraj, sorry to cut you off, but I think we've got a sense of what the issue is. So you're doing systematic review here around diagnosis, Alzheimer's, looking at Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed. You got 26,000 hits and 1 month to finish. Martin, what do you think?
You can't possibly do that. I mean, it's just not realistic. And what that tells me is that your question is far too wide. You really need to narrow it down and be very clear. What is the specific question that you are asking? Because, you know, if you're looking at something like Parkinson's disease, I mean, there is a lot of literature around, but when you're looking at, there must be some particular aspect you're looking at. And really, I think we need to know what is the particular aspect and getting that into your search strategy. Get the search strategy to work for you.
Yep.
You shouldn't be a slave to it. You shouldn't just, there's often a tension whereby there's what we call FOMO sometimes, a fear of missing out, a fear that you'll miss a critical paper. But often what you're bringing in is a lot of stuff that's really very tangentially relevant. You don't have to cover absolutely everything. You need enough literature to be able to answer the question. Now, if you're doing a meta-analysis of the effect of a drug, then you clearly need to get every study that has looked at the effect of that drug on that particular outcome, not just the outcome on its own with all the things that could cause it, not just the drug and all the things it could do, but you've got to specify that, and then you've got to review them and look at the quality and risk of bias. That's fine, but there won't be that many studies of most drug outcome interventions. But when you get into a lot of other issues, often it's because you haven't really defined the I mean, I don't know in this case, but it's because you haven't really defined the question narrowly enough.
Well, let's pull it up. Divraj actually submitted a mini workup of the review to help us see what's going on. So let's pull this up for Divraj, and I'll try to maximize this so you can see it. The tool that we use, can you see this on the screen, Martin? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So the tool we used for defining the search is Pico. which defines a population, the intervention, the outcome in the C, sometimes a comparison group. And that you need to have at least two of those elements defined for not to be too broad. And so when I see this looking at artificial intelligence systems to better diagnosis, this works. But what immediately jumps out to me, Martin, is that these are strange bedfellows to me.
There are three conditions. I mean, why look at all three? One of them would be enough.
One would be enough. I agree. And there's already going to be a lot on this. And I think I think this is a fantastic topic, actually. I think this is very hot. The other thing I immediately see, I'm kind of scanning through, Dave Rusher, we're going quickly. The final search string, I think we need to tweak a little bit, because you're going for both ends of life. You're getting newborns and you're getting older persons with with Parkinson and these other areas. I think Martin's suggestion here, stick to one, would work well. And
also, I mean, just on that, David, I don't know how you would actually write that paper, because you're going to typically have 3,500 words for a paper, maybe 5,000 words if you're lucky, and some journals will take longer. But to describe what it is you're doing and why you're doing, looking at all three of them, you're going to be taking up quite a lot of words, which doesn't leave you much to report in your results. But the other problem with this particular topic is that in an area like artificial intelligence, it is so rapidly moving that you've got to then move from your search to the submission quickly, because every week, every month that it's sort of hanging around as you're working on the writing of it, as it's in the review process, it's rapidly getting out of date. That's the real issue. So this is a really challenging topic.
Yep, I'm glad you say that, Martin, because I often see students who work on a review, they get hung up at a step. And when you're doing this for the first time, there's so many places where you can get stuck. And then their data gets stale, and they've done something perfectly good, perfectly publishable, but maybe didn't have enough confidence to see it to the end, and they end up having to redo the whole thing because they waited too long.
Yeah, and I really think this point about the fear of missing out, fear of missing a study, you're going to miss a study anyway, because by the time, as soon as you actually submit that paper, even between that time and when the editor looks at it and decides to send it out to reviewers, and then the interval before they get the reviewers, we've already talked about how difficult that is, it's already going to be out of date. So you are going to miss papers. Now, I think that's where reviewers have a responsibility, because you get these clever reviewers who say, aha, they didn't quote a study. And I've had this quite a few times, I think we both had it, David, where somebody says, you didn't quote a particular paper, and you say, no, we didn't, because it hadn't been published when we submitted. We're not clairvoyants.
Exactly. We've gotten a few funny rejections along the way, Martin. One of my favorite rejections we got was when, you're clearly unaware of the work of Shkolnikov. I think Martin had published 30 papers with.
Well, I said it was actually a letter to the editor about a paper which was criticizing work that David and I did, and said that McKee is clearly unfamiliar with the work of a famous Russian demographer, to which we replied, I don't know all of Vladimir's work, but I'm quite familiar with the 27 papers we've co-authored, honestly, but you do get this sort of silliness.
By the way, one of the powers of community here is that we get feedback and input from others. And Tal's mentioning, by the way, there are many more keywords for AI. We use a nearest neighbor approach to find systematic reviews that operationalize those words, so you're not having to reinvent the wheel. Then you can harvest the keywords they've already tried and tested and validated for AI. So I'd recommend, if what Tal has spotted here is the case, go find other systematic reviews on AI and just lift what already worked for them. It's going to make it much more defensible. Okay, we got to keep moving. I see a lot of questions coming through the chat. We're going to come to these at the end if we've got time. I want to take the other video submission we've got. And by the way, if you want to submit to these sessions as well, join my Facebook group, and we are routinely posting a link for you to submit. And we can also be in the DMs, directly be in touch. Martin McKee is also hanging out there with us. And there's a lot more. But let me take Lolita's submission here and pull up Lolita. And this one is in humanities. Hang on a second. I'm going to promote Lolita here to center stage. Okay, here's Lolita.
My question or my dilemma is that my research guide has commented several times that my work does not have a proper structure. There is no flow of thought. uh, though when I express my ideas, my research gap, and discuss my work, he says when you're saying it, it's there, it is, but when you're writing it, it is not available, it is not evident in your writing, and it's pretty disconnected. So I have shared the chapter, and a chapter that I have already written, and I would like to know where I'm going wrong, how it is disconnected as he claims it to be.
Okay. So, Alita, again, sorry to cut you off, but I want to dive into this. So, Martin, it seems like Alita's got a disconnect. When she talks to her supervisor
Yeah.
about the research gap, clear, sounds good, but then translating the thoughts onto paper, whatever's hitting the page is disconnected, hard to follow, and missing structure.
Yeah, so just one obvious suggestion on that. Forgive me if I seem to be looking in different directions. My camera is on my laptop and the screen is on my larger desktop. So it's not that I'm not looking at you. Yeah, I mean, the most obvious solution there, actually, and it's a problem that we all face, is how I address that is I've got voice recognition software. There are lots of different packages. I mean, it's in Microsoft Word now. I happen to use Dragon. And you might want to think, and it doesn't work for everybody, but sometimes it works. If you're saying things that make sense, but you're writing things that don't, talk to your computer. Just say it. And because I think sometimes we feel that the language that we write has to be more complex than what we say. And sometimes when we do that, things get lost. I don't know if that would work here, but it might do. Just say what you're going to say, get the computer to turn it into text, and then decide whether or not that's better than what you've written down. That's one suggestion.
That's really not a bad idea. Let's pull up what Lolita has shared with us and take a look, Martin, see if we diagnose some of the potential issues. Let me adjust the size here so you can see it. Can you see that now a little bit better, Martin?
I can, yes, thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's take 30 seconds and join us with us. So, one of the best ways for you to get good and have a critical eye at your own work is practicing on other papers. So take a look and see if you can spot what might be behind this disconnect. And I'm just going to scan through a few paragraphs. Okay. All right, I'm already spotting a few things here, Martin.
Yeah.
Anything jumping off the page to you?
Yeah. So just go back up to the beginning, if you would.
Yep.
So, who is Kota Nalima, and why should we be interested in her? I mean, that's the most obvious question. What it is, and maybe it's in the earlier chapters, but I think it needs to stand alone a bit there. Obviously, she's a journalist, but what type of a journalist is she? And what is the problem? I mean, or maybe she's not a journalist. Maybe a journalist who actually is a novelist. If I'm understanding that right, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Martin, but yeah, I mean, sometimes I like writing chapters as standalone units, because what will happen is your reviewers and readers might, put this down, come back to it after a week, and they've forgotten all the context. So make it easy for them.
So just on that, I mean, the advice, as you know, that I give to my PhD students is that chapters should only be of a sufficient length that they can be read between coffee breaks by examiners. You do not want an examiner having a chapter which just goes on and on and on, and they think there is actually empirical evidence. Again, David and I have written a lot about cognitive biases, but there is a nice study from Israel, actually, of judges making decisions in court and showing that the longer it is from their last coffee break, the harsher their judgment is. So you can apply that to PhD examiners. The longer it is in their coffee, and you don't like to take a coffee break in the middle of a chapter. You want to take a break after it. So don't make the chapters too long. But that said, the chapter has to then, because then you come back from your coffee, you've gone off, you've had a look at the paper, you've made the coffee, whatever, and you think, well, you've got to get back into it. So that each chapter must really say what this chapter is going to do, why it's important,
Yeah.
why it's going to do it, what it does, and then you can get into
And
it. But I just don't know at the minute. I'm
yeah,
sorry
I'm
about
missing that. It's really hard to penetrate for that reason. And what you're saying, Martin, is exactly the notion of signposting. But
that.
if you're going to
Absolutely.
take a trip and you're going to go right from London to Milan to come visit me, if you don't have a map to guide, you could end up in Frankfurt or Copenhagen or somewhere else. But your readers are going to get lost if it seems like you're zigging and zagging to the left and to the right. So really simplify that presentation to let the readers know where you're going to take them. And I'm missing that. Now, I know literature papers can take a few more artistic liberties in writing and use more complex double helix type structures, but you don't need that complication. The research is already complicated enough. In academic writing, there's a premium to place on clarity and linearity, even in the humanities. So I recommend maybe and sometimes the lack of signposting can reflect a challenge in the outline itself. And what I'm seeing here as well, Martin, is that there doesn't appear to be a clear outline powering each paragraph.
Yeah.
The paragraphs look good in the sense that each paragraph is making trying to make a big point, but I'm not seeing this kind of flow from one paragraph to the next, driving the car in a straight line.
We always say you should, in something like this, say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said. But also the other point you make is that each paragraph should have a point. So, you could do something like print it all out and then take a marker pen and something and then just scribble over what is the point of each paragraph.
Yeah.
That's another way. I mean, you don't have to do this, but sometimes it helps.
Yeah, Lolita, thanks for sharing this with us. Hope this helps you. I'm going to link you up afterwards, ask our assistant Marina in the group to link you to our peer system writing training and some examples of chapter writing with PhD students where we actually worked on exactly these problems to help better bring that connection of what you have in your head and making sure that translates onto the page well. But thank you again for sharing that with us. All right, at this stage, we're going to go for the moment you've been waiting for, our top 5 reasons your paper got rejected and what you can do about it. So without further ado, Martin, I'm going to dive into the first one here and see what you think. And you can think I'm way off, but these are ones that have affected us and could affect any of you if you don't follow these steps. So number 1, I've got here. Number 1, your paper is not a good fit for the journal.
Yeah, and we've already talked a little bit about that, but there's no point in saying to the European Heart Journal a paper about the anatomy of the foot or something like that. That's the obvious one. But you've got to look at what it is they publish. Are they publishing biomedical science stuff? Are they having epidemiology? I mean, many journals do have a mix of these things, but make sure they do have a section which relates to the type of paper that you're submitting it to. The geography is also important, actually. See where they've published papers from before. Now, there is a problem because some journals do claim to be international, but actually they're not. And this is a problem I've certainly had. We've both had with American journals in particular that claim to have a global reach. I remember one where, in fact, it did get published to the editor, so through this, but it was a paper about health in Russia. And one of the reviewers said, well, this is a perfectly good paper, but it would be much more interesting to our readership if it was about Africa. You think, well, no, it wasn't about Africa. I've written about Africa elsewhere with African colleagues, but do make sure that they do cover what you're doing. And I think that is a challenge, particularly for those of you from outside the UK or the Netherlands or the United States or Canada or maybe Australia. Unfortunately, many academics really focus on, they know about what they know about, and they can't quite see the importance of a paper from elsewhere. So you can get into a leading American journal, you'll get a paper about something that is really only relevant to Kansas or Tennessee or Wyoming. But it is, it's of no interest beyond that, perhaps. But then send them a paper which is about even the UK or even worse, Burkina Faso or Vietnam, and no interest at all, even though they may claim to be international. So there are challenges there. Just make sure that it actually does fit.
Yeah.
I think, that's the biggest challenge.
Let me jump there on this not a good fit. I mean, sometimes it's frustrating. You send something and then within, seems like 10 minutes, you get a rejection back. And to me, then sometimes students go in a tailspin and they want to do radical surgery to the paper. I think as Martin was saying before, don't do that.
Don't.
You don't have any meaningful information there. It doesn't mean that your paper is crap and should go straight in the bin. It just means it's probably not a good fit. I recommend always preparing a list of maybe 3 to 5 journals to lock and load so that it's just easy to go to the next journal that you have on your list. Like Martin's saying, I mean, farm kind of the introduction of journals to see if there's a debate and discussion around this topic. If you look in your own cited references and you see a lot of papers cited in that journal, it's probably going to be a good journal to submit to because it means there's an active conversation and debate that journal is hosting. They want your dialogue in there.
So there's a paper. Yeah. There's a paper that David and I are working on at the minute, actually, about artificial intelligence, where fortunately the journal we're sending it to has recently had an editorial which says we want more papers on these types of topics. So our first point is we're following up what the editors of the journal said they wanted. So therefore it's a logical fit. I mean, that's the easiest one. So you don't often I mean, we haven't actually submitted it yet, so we don't know what will happen. Mainly because we're waiting for David to finish it. But
students are keeping me busy. But Martin makes a very good point. One way to know you got a great fit is when the editors just say, hey, we want papers. There's a call for papers, often issued in journals or even special issues. And that can really be a great way to optimize your chances of success. We could say a lot more about this, but Martin, I want to get to reason number 2. And reason number 2, and this has happened a lot, is unclear contribution to the field. Unclear value.
Yeah, and this is another real challenge. Now, to some extent, this depends on whether you're submitting to a journal that has a theoretical or an empirical focus. In a theoretical, journals that are more theoretical, they're often looking for additions to theory. Either you're contradicting a theory or adding a new theory, which I think is a bit of a problem because it almost assumes there's an infinite number of theories out there all waiting to be developed, and somebody has to try and make sense of them all in due course. There's a very nice example that I use of this, which is from the 1960s. It wasn't so much, well, it was people who were having difficulty getting a series of papers published. And these were sociologists from the University of Michigan in Detroit, and there had been race riots in the 1960s in Detroit. And they did working with African American communities and so on, trying to understand the reasons why there was so much dissatisfaction, why that had boiled over into riots. And they wrote about how their experience at the time with their colleagues, who frankly could not see any point in doing a paper that was so empirically based and was designed to inform policy. They just thought that's not what we do in our discipline. We develop theory, and unless you could show that this was some special case of theory or whatever, they just weren't interested. There was also, I have to say, they made the point, another issue. They couldn't work out why anybody was interested in what was happening with African Americans, which reflected the attitudes of the time. So, you may have a challenge there. With empirical journals, it's easier, but then, but don't assume that the editors know all these things. Editors of journals cover a very broad range of issues. They will not know what the contemporary debates are in particular fields or particular areas. So you've got to make it absolutely clear. First of all, you've got to say, and maybe we'll come on to this, you've got to actually make clear what question is it that you're actually trying to answer. But then having made that clear, that's the sort of absolute essential. You've got to say, why is this an important question, and why should we be answering it now, and why should we be answering it in this setting? Don't assume that they know things. And also remember that the whole point about the editing and journal reviewing is absolutely full of cognitive biases. So something that you write down that you think is perfectly clear, other people will read it from their own perspective, and they'll read something completely different. So you can never overcome that completely, but you can try your best to just make it as simple, as clear as possible as to why this is new. Now, the other problem you have is that you will be building on previous work by others. And particularly in some of the social sciences, We all know that people working in social sciences work in silos. They don't read other people's literature. We've had this, David and I have had this actually in a number of papers where we've been making this point, and we've undertaken network analyses to show which papers are citing which ones, looking at the cross citations, and you get clusters. So if you're looking at a complex topic like, the global financial health and the global financial crisis, you get a group of sociologists here, a group of economists here, a group of political scientists somewhere else, all reading and citing their own literature. And then there's David and myself and other colleagues, Aaron Reeves and others. Well, we're reading all of these literatures and bringing them together. But when we publish the network analysis, or we put the network analyses in the paper, reviewers absolutely hate them and they want them taken out. And almost certainly that's because they know that they're in those clusters, not reading other things. So you've got to recognize that when you're making the case for why something is original, you may, depending on the topic, have to say not just how does it contribute generally, but you may need to say how does it contribute given what the sociologists are saying, what the political scientists are saying. Maybe not, depends what the topic is, but you've got to be aware of that. And the other thing you've got to do is that when you're adding to knowledge, just be clear that when you're writing about these topics, the review papers will be sent to the reviewers who've worked in this area. So don't just say, well, we're adding to knowledge because somebody else did something and that they are an idiot and they wrote complete nonsense, because that idiot will be the one who'll get to review your paper almost certainly.
Yeah, it is delicate, that balance, Martin, in the introduction. You don't want to trash what's come before you, but you do need to say that they missed out on some important things that you're going to go fulfill and achieve.
But say it politely. You got to say it politely.
That's really good advice. Again, put yourself often in the mind's eye of the editor. As they're combing through reviewers, they're looking for people to invite to review your paper. They're probably going to look at who you've been citing in that introduction.
They are,
right around where you're articulating that gap in your contribution. So, really good point. Martin, let me move on to 3. We got lots to say here, and we actually have some dedicated training on each of these reasons to help you submit like a pro, like you've done it thousands of times before. If you're interested in that, kind of up here to, right up there, click that QR and it'll take you to some of our free training and explain a little bit just in terms of how we've helped so many students publish fast, even if they've failed, gotten rejected, struggled many times, or never even done research at all. So check that out. Okay, reason number 3, Martin, I've got, is methodological flaws or a perceived risk of bias?
Yeah, sure. Now, there is a challenge here, actually, because there is what my colleagues like Trish Greenhalgh and others talk about as methodolatry, where methods are idols in essentially where an individual method is worshipped, where if you haven't done a randomized controlled trial, then it didn't happen. And I've done randomized controlled trials. I've done lots of observational studies. I've done used lots of other methods. So you've got to make sure that the method you use is an appropriate fit. Now, then we keep coming back to the reviewers. If they just don't believe anything that isn't an RCT, you're going to be stuck anyway. But you've got to make the case for why you're using the method you're using, and having done it, use it properly. And by that I mean, there are loads of checklists around for systematic reviews, for clinical trial reporting, whatever. Use them, because the reviewers will be using them too, and report along the grade for evidence, whatever. There are lots of them available. So make sure that you show that you've actually done the method the way it's meant to be done. And that's much, much easier now because you have all of these checklists.
Mark, just to add on that point, though, a kind of a bonus tip related to this. If you've just gotten a rejection, and people have pointed out methodological flaws, I strongly encourage you to treat that rejection like a revision. As far. So our principle on revisions is do the minimum possible to thoroughly address the reviewer's points. And the reason is, when you go resubmit, the editors might follow that same algorithm for finding reviewers, and they might find the exact same reviewer again, who will then say, well, they didn't get it right the first time, haven't got it right here. So take those points as seriously as you
Oh,
can, even
absolutely.
if you think they're rubbish. Right, what do you think, Mark?
Yeah. Often as a reviewer in a particular area, you will be sent the same paper back again, and you really get pretty fed up if they haven't addressed it at all. Now, it may well be that, so I think you need to say, you don't need necessarily to make changes, but you do need to say why you didn't make changes. Just as a bit of an anecdote with a paper that some of us had accepted, actually was accepted this morning. We had a paper which we submitted to a journal, and we got, I think, about 4 pages of reviewers' comments, all saying that everything was wrong. We addressed point by point all of those, everything that they had said, and we basically said both of the reviewers didn't know that what they were talking about. It was complete nonsense. We changed 2 words, and it was accepted within 24 hours. So you can, push back on these things. The reviewers can be wrong, but reviewers are often right as well. I mean, I'm being very negative about reviewers. Often they are right, and if they do make good points, just do it, because. Even if it doesn't go back to them, it'll go back to other people who spot the same thing.
Yep. Excellent points.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to make, just to make this point about, use the appropriate method. And there's a classic study by Jill Pell and others, in one of the Christmas British medical journals one time. And it was a tongue-in-cheek paper, like many of the Christmas ones are. And it was saying that if you're in a plane that's about to crash, you shouldn't use a parachute, because nobody submitted parachuting out of crashing planes to a randomized controlled trial. And they then go and say, well, how would you do this? Well, you could have people jumping out of the plane while it's on the ground. And they're all nonsense, of course. But the simple point is, you do not need to do a randomized controlled trial to know that parachutes work. I mean, that was her point. Get the right method and justify why you're doing things. An important one that was during the pandemic, face masks for transmission of COVID, for example. And there you have a challenge in that the intervention of the face mask is on one person, and the outcome on whether they spread it to somebody else is another person. And the connection between the two, because any one individual will meet lots of other people, you just can't do it. You can do cluster RCTs where you've got villages in Bangladesh, as they did, but you cannot do an individual trial where just methodologically it doesn't make sense. Justify why you're doing the method.
So I think you brought up something, Martin, that I always like to say. Sometimes I think when you're first doing research, you might feel a need to kind of hide a bit weaknesses and hope, maybe they won't catch that. Instead, with these papers, you want to actually put those weaknesses front and center. And in a way, I like to think of it as like this bull is going to charge at you, and you want to have the carpet there and like deflect the bull, like let it glide by. So what we like to do is armor up the discussion section with limitations to show, hey, I've already thought of that, and here's what we did. We already
and you've done everything you could, and you've done everything. And this is where I think a good reviewer who has done this type of research will be fine on that. There are, unfortunately, reviewers who spend their time reviewing and doing systematic reviews and things who've never actually done the research. Doing a cluster RCT, for example, as we did in Malaysia and Colombia a number of years ago, is really, really difficult. I mean, you will have attrition, you will have loss to follow up, you will have problems of the fidelity of the intervention. Just accept it. I mean, and then look at what impact that might have. And that paper was published in the Lancet, so it's fine. And it was a very well done study, but it wasn't perfect, because you cannot. I mean, if you get a perfect study done in that, then I think you raise questions about whether the data are genuine, because it's just not possible to get everything right.
I think that's a really good point, Martin. And too, I see some students having a reluctance to submit, also because they're acutely aware of their own limitations, and it's never good enough. So this streak of perfectionism, I think you said to me, somebody said to me, that perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah, it is.
And I've seen many incredibly bright people. It really plagues incredibly bright people not finish because of that streak of perfectionism.
So my response to that is something I usually say when I'm encouraging my students to engage with policy, and they say, "Oh, well, I don't know enough about that. I couldn't say that, and I'm not an expert in this." And I say, just watch. Here in the UK, we have a BBC television program every week called Question Time. I said, just look at that. You get these extremely confident politicians who clearly are complete idiots, who know nothing about what they're talking about, and yet they're willing to display their ignorance on national television every week. You can do better than that. In fact, probably your cat could do better than that. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also at the beginning of the journey, you feel like, well, there are these greats and giants around me like Martin McKee. How am I ever going to measure up? And it's very easy to feel small and feel a sense of imposter syndrome, like you're a fraud, that people are going to find out about you, that you're not good enough. This especially affects women.
That's a very good point. I mean, young women. Yeah. I mean, really, because I think I've spent my life trying to support my younger female colleagues. I think I'd like to say that many of them are now professors, actually, and it is a real challenge because of the norms in society. Maybe it's different in different countries, but there is so much of putting people down and telling them that they can't contribute whenever they absolutely can. Couldn't agree more.
Glad you mentioned that. You no matter who you are, you need a mentor, because what got you here won't get you there. Really encourage you to find one, or check out the options we have if you're interested in working with us more directly. All right, let me move on to reason number 4, Martin, and then our last reason. And then we're going to take some questions, and I can actually see we've got Matt Parpst, who does a lot of work with our developing country students, who's going to be joining us to take a couple AI questions. So number 4, we've got rookie mistakes. And by rookie mistakes, I mean submitting, but maybe having the cover letter written in a funky way, or not really knowing how to navigate the submission process that signals to the editors these guys just don't know what they're doing.
You've said it all, really. Don't make mistakes like that.
Don't make rookie mistake. Yeah. So if you gotta, sometimes people say, "Oh, I need somebody famous on the paper." And you don't. Oh, exactly. In fact, I think it can sometimes be risky to have somebody famous on the paper, because you're inheriting the good and the bad and the ugly that come with them, because they have a particular stake and reputation in the field.
Yeah, so a colleague of mine who was an editor of a major textbook, a very major textbook, and got chapters in from some very famous individuals, and said when he looked at them, either what they had sent to him as the editor, they hadn't actually written, or if they had written it, then they'd never written all of the other things that had their name on it. You don't need a big name on it, and I don't feel you have to have one.
All right, let's go to reason number 5, and this kind of linked. I call them howlers, but things that the readers start reading, and maybe the abstract is like the wrong formatting for the journal, and they think, like, was this even submitted the right journal? Or maybe there's just spelling errors that make people think you did a cursory job when you actually did a through job, but you just had some weird things pop in when accepting track changes. What do you think about this,
I think the issue about track changes is important, because when in Word you can look at it with all the changes tracked, the simple version, which only has the comment boxes, or nothing else visible. Just make sure, if you're sending in a manuscript that is track changes, that you've read it carefully through in the clean version. Because often it is that too many spaces, or either they come or they go or whatever, and you don't see them. I mean, particularly where there's a lot of revisions. This is more for resubmissions, and it's just a sea of whatever color you're tracked in, and you just cannot follow it. So just be careful. That's where mistakes often happen. References I've already spoken about. Just make sure you get them right, and that's why I would always use EndNote software. But there really is no excuse now for not getting the spelling and the grammar right. I'm amazed at how much I get sent to me where people have just not done a spell check, or not set the language. Make sure you set it US or UK English. But the problem with writing for the World Health Organization is they have their own one that's in the middle somewhere, just to be awkward.
But yeah, imagine you've spent years doing research, put together an amazing piece of work,
Yeah.
only to have it kicked out because you didn't do a 5-minute proper spell
Yeah.
or grammar check.
Yeah, and the grammar checkers are in words. I mean, I do use Grammarly. I mean, I've written, as I say, an awful
Yep.
lot, but I still find it's quite good for making sure that the flow works. I mean, but other packages are available.
Grammarly's free. We're not sponsored by Grammarly. Grammarly's free.
No,
I
I'm not.
recommend
No.
everybody, especially if English is not your first language, to
Yeah.
tap into Grammarly.
Even if it is your first language, actually, it can be.
Yeah.
I mean, any of these packages, I don't know the other ones, but they often just. I mean, it's turning. And the other thing is writing in an active voice rather than a passive voice. It makes it flow easier.
Yeah, you're tapping into our writing tips, Martin.
Okay, fair enough.
The free writing training that basically, I mean, what I've done is taken what I've learned in writing from Martin, that Martin, I don't even think you've necessarily put together, and packaged them into a series of step-by-step videos, which is awesome. So to make accessible many of the things that get passed down informally, for example, that I learned from Martin when we were working together, now accessible to everybody, 100% free. You'll find it in our Facebook group, and or just write to myself and Marina, and we'll set you up. Martin, I want to cap this and bring Matt on for a second, and we'll take some questions because I like to keep us to time. But Martin, any other tips? These were the 5 that I came up with from some of our collective experiences. But anything that we might have overlooked here?
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole series of ones, actually. I did make some notes. The other thing that you got to be really careful about now is artificial intelligence, plagiarism, inadvertent plagiarism, or deliberate plagiarism, because the journals are going to be checking that anyway. But I think one of the things looking ahead is that we all do use artificial intelligence. There's a lot of packages which can be very helpful, but remember, you need to make the final decisions. You need to be in control of it, and don't let it, because you get people who, and there's a growing body of research on this showing that if you use ChatGPT, it what they call hallucinates. It makes up references. So don't do that.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think the other problem that we're going to get into more and more is what's called autophagy. And that is that the large language models, many of the AI packages are synthesizing work that was done by humans, because that's what's been on the internet primarily. But already there's a large amount of material in the internet that was actually done by artificial intelligence. And once you start, in a way, it's a little bit like, devouring your children in a way, or a bit like something like Kuru or BSE. Once you start cannibalizing these things, all sorts of things can go wrong. So I think just be really careful, because you can reproduce errors. And we all know that often papers that are quoted don't actually say what they're set. They once somebody takes a key reference and they summarize it and quote it and cite it, but they do it incorrectly, that mistake is then replicated again and again and again, and that's going to become much, much more of a problem.
Yep. So just say here, let me pull on Matt for a second. I just see Matt kind of joined. We invited some of the people working with us to join. Hey, Matt, good to have you
Matt.
here.
Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while.
Hey, David. Hey, Martin. Good to see you.
Matt, we've just been covering top 5 reasons papers get rejected, and I know you work on a lot to help preempt and stop some of these before they take place with a lot of our students from low and middle income countries. But I wanted to bring up this point because Matt's kind of our resident expert, really at the forefront of using AI. And I wanted to give you all a chance to jump in on this question from Rahi, who asks, is it ethical to use ChatGPT to rewrite papers to improve language clarity and flow? What do you think, Matt?
Well, I'd just like to echo what Martin was saying about making sure that you are the driver of AI, and you're constantly checking your work and what facts are bringing up. But I think, in my opinion, it is extremely ethical, and it's one way you can actually improve your writing very, very quickly in a short amount of time. For example, I do this constantly for myself, is that if I want to clarify a paragraph, note that it is my writing that I put into ChatGPT first. And I do have a running, lineage of my writing just in case plagiarism comes up. But I ask, for example, ChatGPT to give me 3 or 4 different versions of what that paragraph would look like. I can see the best path forward, and I can say even in this last year of using it, my writing has improved. I've seen clarity things. So I think as long as that you are the driver, and it's important to note is that ChatGPT might seem magical, but there are levels of using it. If you are not a good user, you won't get a good output. So I think it's ethical, but I think there is a learning curve to using it correctly. And also in the background, it's always important to ensure that you're not just taking what it says as the truth. Is that you need to be, cognizant that it does make errors. And I'm very confident, for example, that humans still will be, the forefront of experts because it's going to take a while because ultimately it still takes a good human user to get a great end product within that framework. So I think it's ethical, and I think you can ethically use it by kind of following those steps. Make sure that you have your own work saved, but being critical about the information. But it ultimately will improve what you can do. I think that's great. I think it's a great thing.
Look,
Yeah, I agree.
Martin, thoughts on this in terms of submitting too, because the journals are increasingly asking for acknowledging what role ChatGPT played.
And I think you should state whether you've used it or not. I think journals now expect you to do that, and I think that's reasonable. But I think it's perfectly fine. But you've got to stay in charge of it. Don't.
Right.
Where I find it helpful, for example, is if you've got to cover a topic, and you can think through what are all the headings that I need. It's good for that sort of thing. Most of them you would have got anyway, but there'll be something that you might have forgotten. Now, just because it puts that in doesn't mean you have to accept it, but at least it prompts you to think about that. And there's another one I use, SciSpace, which I find quite good.
Yeah.
And that's quite, you cannot do, I'm sure you will be able to in due course do systematic reviews using some of these things, but to get a broad feel of the literature where you only need a paragraph which is setting out the general themes, you're not doing a systematic review, you're not answering a specific question, but you want to cover, the basic issues to say this is, so I think that you can use it, but stay in control and always check the references, read the individual papers that it comes up with.
By the way, just on SciSpace, going to add, we have negotiated bulk discounts because we recommend SciSpace highly as one of the AI tools to make reading faster. David has 40% off annual, 20% off monthly. Matt, I know you've been using SciSpace a lot and had good results with it too.
I think for example, I would use SciSpace a lot to finding new literature and stuff like that. It seems to be very up to date with up-to-date papers, and that's very nice. I don't recommend using ChatGPT to find up-to-date literature.
No.
I think if you're going for sources, is that you can get suggestions, and you might get a 50-60% reality rate on that. It is good for, like Martin was saying, is that I really use it a lot of times for thought experiments, like thinking through research problems. I tell it a problem, what would be some possible solutions, etc. So, but again, is that you're always kind of the driver, and I think that's the ethical way of using it. But I think SciSpace, getting back to your point, is that very good for finding new papers and seeing across a literature. I guess that's been my sense of SciSpace so far. It's good for that.
Yep. Excellent. Look, we're going to take a couple more questions here before we wrap up. And I'm also going to share the link if you want to submit your video questions to our show here. That we'll tap those next week. We check them all. But let me go through a couple that we got here from Tal. So Tal writes a two-part question. He says he recently found out a topic he thought was extremely hot is something journal editors are not too fond of. And it's been so hard to publish a paper that he thinks is actually good. What do you do in that situation?
Well, without knowing what it is, it's really difficult to give advice, So, I think this is likely to, it may well, I don't know, it may well be an issue of the fit with the journal, something like that. I think it is just, but without knowing the details, I'm not sure I could say.
Yeah. Matt,
we've all had that.
Do you have any thoughts on that? We've all had that experience.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to me, it signals fit for a journal, and that's the overall thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, there's some tips and tricks to scope the journal. Just make sure. I mean, sometimes you can be so far ahead of the curve that, especially in a rapidly evolving field, that the journal editors don't even recognize the topic, or could be too narrow or too niche that they don't recognize that it's of wide interest to their readership. So you may need to take a step back and your entry point be a broader conversation already happening in the journal, and then suddenly go into the topic to really articulate the value add to a conversation that's already going on. But yeah, send that to us, tell us a video question, and we can look at it more concretely. We got another one here. It's going to cut off the question a little bit. But Nabeha asks, and sorry if I got your name wrong, how to know the level of your article, whether you submit to either a transaction or lower level, and how to cope with funding issues if you don't have funding. Yeah. So this is kind of, I think I'm interpreting the first part as what level to calibrate your journal submission to, and the second part of that is what if you don't have funding to publish?
Yeah, I think this comes back to looking at what the journal has published before, and that's getting your fit right. Again, it's difficult to be more specific than that. But if you find that what your paper is completely out of line with what other papers are in the journal, then you're going to have problems. The issue of funding, I think, is a real problem. I mean, I have had real concerns from the very beginning about open access and so on, because I think what it does is consolidate power in those people who have got the money, particularly heads of department and so on. And it's a real barrier to early career researchers getting papers published. Hopefully you've got an institution where there is some money that recognizes this, or a university or a country. Many governments do have deals where they've actually some sort of a contract with the publisher to get things. But I have ethical concerns. I mean, there is this argument that everything should be open access because the knowledge should be available to all. That's fine if you're being paid to do the work and somebody's paying for it, but it doesn't take account of, if you go through history, the number of people who were not funded, who have made fundamental contributions, really important contributions to our knowledge, the amateur archaeologists and paleontologists and, other people who would now struggle. So but that's not an answer to it. I think one of the ways in which you can do it, obviously, and let's be pragmatic, this is what does happen, is that you link up with somebody who has got the money and then they become the corresponding author or whatever it needs.
Yeah. I can see people scanning in. I've just put up a QR code to submit your video question so we can go into detail and you can tap all the expertise of these giant brains I have on here with us, Martin and Matt. And if you'd like to explore the potential to work with us, do get in touch. You can follow the links below, or you can find on my YouTube channel, or join the Facebook group where we have lots of live group chats to engage. A lot of us have really struggled along the way as researchers, and the reason we set up FastTrack is to make accessible this wealth of knowledge we have for the world to benefit. It's the training that and support that I wish I would have had, and thankfully I got from reaching out and finding people like Martin McKee along the way, but not everybody is so fortunate to have that. So definitely join, and we cover all these things kind of like vitamin shots for your research and PhD to help you have a smooth and easy ride. We're going to take one more question here, but yeah, I see several people scanning the QR so that they can submit. Here we go. We've got a question from Nahal. So Nahal says, take a look for a second. When submitting your paper, you're asked, has it been rejected by another journal? What do you say to that, and how do you decrease the impact of that rejection on your paper for acceptance by another journal? Spin over to you, Martin and Matt.
Well, I'm not sure that they don't usually ask if it's been rejected by another journal. They say, is it under review with another journal? That's the question they usually ask, and it should never be under review with two at the same time. But I'm not sure I've seen that.
I've never seen that personally.
No.
And if you haven't seen that, Martin, in the 1,500 you've published.
No, exactly. I think I mean, it's possible I didn't read it, but I think I would have noticed it.
Such an issue.
Well, I think how I'm interpreting it is that if it was rejected by something else going forward, how do we make sure it doesn't get rejected again? And I think some of the advice that we got here about treating the past rejection as an R&R going forward is which I learned from you guys being the mentors here, is that seems to be the best advice, is make sure that you've actually addressed some of the things, whether it be methodological or some of the big, critiques of your paper before you send it off, if need be.
Yeah.
But that minimum dose to get it to the next step.
Really good point, Matt. Yeah, a rejection, even though it can sting and burn, is an opportunity to improve for the next round if you get meaningful feedback. If it's just a text rejection for a reason, one, that you weren't a good fit, you don't have any meaningful information to work with. Last question, and I really love the engagement today. Fantastic topic. I think we could do a whole dedicated session on AI. If you want us to cover any topics for you or do a live session on it, let us know in that video submission as well. And I can see someone saying how to publish high impact papers. That might be a great one for our next session. I'm going to take, and I can see that we're getting some thanks from the crowd here. I'm glad to hear you're enjoying this. Let me come to Chen. Last question for today, and we'll all be in touch in DMs through the Facebook group. But Chen says, university wants me to publish frequently. But I aim to balance this by publishing or submitting some work to top tier journals while also considering Q3, Q4, which is third, fourth quartile publications to meet their demands for the frequency of publishing. There's a couple things going on in this question. One about the pressure to publish volumes, and the second about, again, how to appropriately target and tailor your journals to the right level of the journal. What do you guys think here?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask on this. I mean, the obvious answer is you try to do both. Try and publish lots in top tier journals, but you can't always do that. I have to say that a lot of the publications that I have that are in the lower tier journals are often where you're supporting early career researchers to get their first or their second publication, that sort of thing. Clearly, one would like the work that you're really working on to be in a top tier journal. But there are also issues where you're doing work in regions that you just know will not get into the top tier journals simply because the editors are not interested in that. I do quite a lot of work with African colleagues, and this is about the whole sort of Western focus of whatever. The reality of it is that even the best paper you do from some of these countries is going to struggle because you've got to get editors and reviewers to be interested in it. And I've already said, if you'd done it in Tennessee or Kansas, they would have taken it. So it is going to be, these factors are all going to be important.
Excellent. Yeah. Guys, that's a wrap for our session. Martin, big thanks for joining us today. As ever,
my pleasure.
I learned a lot from you. Really glad, Matt, to have you tucked
it works both ways
on the back end.
It works both ways. Good to see you, Matt.
Okay, people. And look, if you're happy, I think we should do more of these sessions together. We want your video submissions. Get in touch with us, and you can also learn more about how we can work more closely and intimately together. And guys, that's a wrap for today. Have a great week, and we will see you all